In this video, we'll be covering Anchor's high availability configuration. Anchor's high availability configuration allows you to place multiple Anchor servers side by side so that incoming agent connections can connect to either of those servers for a connection. The configuration also allows you to distribute the single Apache installation and the single PostgreSQL installation onto the machines of your choice. Ultimately, it eliminates the single point of failure at the Anchor server service level, and it allows the distribution of load across multiple Anchor servers. It should be noted that high availability is only for the Anchor server service, and it is not intended for Apache and PostgreSQL. While the configuration allows you to place Apache and PostgreSQL on the server of your choice within the high availability cluster, it does not replicate Apache or PostgreSQL. This is how the standard configuration looks. You set up 2 or more Anchor servers. You choose which server you would like to set up PostgreSQL on and which server you would like to install Apache on. Then you make sure that the servers can all contact the same storage device where your files will be stored, and you place them behind a load balancer or a DNS server in a round-robin configuration so that the connections can point to one IP address but be routed across all 3 servers on the back end. The requirements for this configuration are as follows. You must have 2 or more servers that meet the system requirements. These can be found on support.anchorworks.com. A load balancer or a DNS server that supports round-robin configurations. That you have storage that can be accessed by all of the machines. A NAS device is preferred, but it's okay to permanently mount storage to one of the machines and then do a network mapping on the other machines. And the last requirement is that you must install Anchor on the server where you want to have PostgreSQL on first. So if you know that there's a specific machine you would like to have the PostgreSQL database installed on, you must install Anchor there first. And we'll walk you through that. Just keep in mind that all of the dependencies, Anchor, PostgreSQL, and Apache, all come in one server installer. You do not need to download the dependencies separately. To prepare for this installation, make sure to write down the IP address of each machine. Make sure that the machines are free of IIS or any additional web server software that might conflict with ports 443, 80, or 510, which are all used by Anchor. Make sure you have access to the load balancer or DNS server you plan on using on the front end, and also make sure you have administrative privileges on all of the machines. For this demonstration, we'll be setting up 3 Anchor servers. We're going to begin by installing Anchor and PostgreSQL on server 1, Anchor and Apache on server 2, and just Anchor on server 3. Then we're going to map the storage to each of these machines, and we'll talk about the load balancer or DNS server mappings that are required. To recap, the steps are: first, install Anchor and PostgreSQL on server 1. We'll be doing some firewall configurations to make sure that the other machines can access PostgreSQL. Second, we'll be installing Anchor and Apache on server 2. Then, third, we'll be installing Anchor on server 3. Fourth, we'll be mapping storage to each of the machines. Then we'll be running through the Anchor software setup, and lastly, we'll be modifying Anchor configuration files to make sure each of the Anchor servers can talk to each other. And finally, we're going to be reviewing the load balancer and DNS server mappings. Let's get started. As you can see, I have my environment already configured. I have server 1 with the orange background, where we'll be installing Anchor and PostgreSQL. I have server 2 with the green background, where we'll be installing Anchor and Apache, and I have server 3 with the blue background, where we'll be installing Anchor. On the left, I have the steps that we just covered, as well as the IP addresses for each of the machines, and a PostgreSQL config that we'll be covering in just a moment. All right, first thing you're going to want to do is download the Anchor server executable. The latest version can be found on anchorworks.com. I've already put the executable on each of the desktops for the 3 machines. Then, within the same directory where you've downloaded the executable, you're going to want to open an elevated command prompt, and you're going to want to run the Anchor server executable, but you're going to want to pass it a special argument, and that is --saas space 1. This argument tells the installer to run in a mode that allows us to choose the components we would like to install. For the first server, the components are going to be Anchor and PostgreSQL. So let's get started. Keep in mind that you must install Anchor as a local admin. The server software will not work properly if you're installing it as a domain admin. It must be a local machine admin. So I'm going to go through the installer until I get to the component selection screen. All right, as you can see, I'm now prompted to choose which components I would like to select to install on this machine. I know that I want to install Anchor and PostgreSQL on this machine, so I'm going to choose yes, I want to install Anchor. I'm not going to install the Apache web server. I want to install that on machine 2. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the IP address for machine 2. I must have this ready beforehand. And I'm going to paste it here where it says what the web server remote IP address is. And I'm going to choose yes, I do want to install PostgreSQL on this server. So those are the 3 components. On this particular machine, I'll be installing Anchor. I will not be installing the Apache web server, but I'm going to specify the IP address of the machine where Apache will be installed. And then I am going to choose yes, I do want to install PostgreSQL on this server. So I'm going to go ahead and continue through the installation. Great. Now that the installation is complete, I'm going to move on to the next steps. First, I want to configure the firewall port 5432 to allow connections from the private network. So I'm going to go to the Windows Firewall, I'm going to go to Inbound Rules, and I'm going to create a new rule. I'm going to select Port, and I'm going to choose a TCP port. And I'm going to specify port 5432. This is the port that PostgreSQL listens on for connections. I'm going to choose to allow the connection, and I'm not going to allow public connections. This rule will not apply to public connections. I'm going to go ahead and name this port appropriately and finish. The next thing I want to do is set a Postgres configuration file so that Postgres knows to accept connections from different machines. This can be found in the PostgreSQL 9.1 installation directory. This will be placed in the default installation directory in the same place where your Anchor server was installed. Then you're going to want to go into the data folder, and you're going to want to find the pg_hba file. We'll go ahead and open that. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and I'm going to make some room here. And as you can see, I already have the config parameters set on the left-hand side. So I'm just going to paste these in. Basically, what this specifies is which machines are allowed to connect to PostgreSQL and which databases and which users are allowed to connect. In my case, the type of connection is going to be a host connection. I'm going to allow connections to all databases. I'm going to allow connections for the user Postgres. And then I'm going to specify an IP address in standard dotted decimal notation with a CIDR mask length. The mask length basically indicates the number of high order bits of the client IP address that must match. So as you can see, all of my servers start with 172.16.1, and I want to make sure that these all match, but anything beyond that will be accepted by Postgres. And then the last parameter here is MD5, which is the encryption or hash method that we'll be using to connect. It's a secure connection. I'm going to go ahead and save this form, and I'm going to restart PostgreSQL by going to Services, Postgres, and restart. Great. Now that PostgreSQL has been installed and configured, as well as the Anchor server on this machine, I'm going to move on to machine 2. On machine 2, I'll be installing Anchor and Apache. I'm going to open an elevated command prompt, just as I did previously, and I'm going to run the Anchor server executable with the special SAAS parameter passed to it. So again, that's --SAAS space 1. Once I get to the component selection screen, I'm going to choose yes, I do want to install the Anchor server service on this system. I'm going to choose yes, I do want to install the web server on this system, since I haven't installed it previously. And I'm going to choose no, I do not want to install PostgreSQL on this system, since I've already installed it. All right, now note that I specified the IP address of the first machine, which is where I installed PostgreSQL. So, to recap, yes, I want to install the Anchor server on the system. Yes, I want to install Apache because I have not installed Apache previously. And no, I do not want to install PostgreSQL because it's already been installed on server 1, which is the IP address that I've specified here. Keep in mind that even if you choose yes, Anchor does not support multiple installations of PostgreSQL or Apache. We only support one installation, and the servers will only recognize one installation. So keep that in mind. You want to have Apache and PostgreSQL as exclusive independent installs. You will be prompted during the installation about an existing database that's been found. This database is the one that we just installed on server 1. You want to choose yes. You're going to be prompted on the third installation also, or each subsequent installation if you have more than 3 machines. Always choose yes. We do not want to wipe and start fresh, so choose yes to use the existing database that you've already installed. So I'm going to go ahead and push finish. And now that the second machine has been configured with Anchor and Apache, and the first machine has been configured with Anchor and PostgreSQL, we can move on to the third machine to install the last Anchor installation. So I'm going to go through the same process. But for this installation, I'm going to choose no for the web server, but I am going to specify the IP address of machine 2, which is where I installed Apache. And I'm going to choose no for PostgreSQL, which was installed on machine 1. So I'm going to specify the IP address for that machine. Again, I'm prompted to choose the database. I'm going to choose yes. Great. Now that this installation is complete, I'm going to make sure that all of my storage is coordinated properly. This is important because the machines need to be able to write data that is coming from the agents that are connected to either of the machines to the same place. So the way I have it configured for this demonstration is that on machine 1, I have 2 drives, one for my files and one for my roots. You can find out more about the distinction in our architectural overview on support.anchorworks.com. But basically, the files are where the raw binary data is stored. This is all of the data from within the sync folders that's uploaded to the web. So all of the raw binary data I want to put on this F drive. Typically, this would be a very large drive, numbering in several terabytes depending on your user base. The second drive is for my SQLite databases. These databases hold the metadata for the files that are uploaded to the system. The metadata is kept separately so that we can query information about the files very quickly and efficiently. This can be a much smaller drive since SQLite databases do not get large at all. You can always add more drives in the future. The only requirement for a high availability configuration is that the drives be accessible to the other machines. So a NAS device is recommended, but in this case, I have mounted permanently 2 drives on this machine, and I will be mapping them on the other 2 machines. I should note that there are 2 requirements for this type of configuration, where the drives are permanently mounted on one machine and you do a network mapping on the other. The 2 conditions are as follows. 1. The drives that you map on machines 2, 3, and subsequent machines must all have the same drive letter as the source machine. So I want to map a drive F to the drive F on server 1, and I want to map a drive R on machines 2 and 3 to the drive R on server 1. So we'll go ahead and do that now, but the second condition that's required is that the drives get mounted before a user logs in. So the drives must be mapped or mounted on the system context or under the system context. We're going to do this by using the group policy editor and setting a startup script under computer configuration that allows the drives to be mapped under the system context. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to server 2, and I'm going to go to the C Anchor server folder, where I'm going to create a new batch file. So this is going to be a .bat file, and I'm just going to call this mount.bat. And I'm going to edit this document, and I'm going to use the net use command to map the F drive to the F drive on server 1. And then I'm also going to use the net use command to map the R drive locally to the R drive on server 1. So note, the notation stands net use, the drive letter I wish to use on this machine, and the location I wish to map it to on the other machines. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these commands since I'll be using the exact same command on the other machines. I'm going to save my changes. I'm just going to copy this file altogether, and I'm going to go into the C Anchor server folder, and I'm going to paste it here. Great. I'm just going to make sure that it's correct. Net use F points to F on server 1, net use R points to R on server 1. Fantastic. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this path and I'm going to go into the Group Policy Editor. Under Computer Configuration, Windows Settings, Scripts, Startup, I'm going to go ahead and add a new script. And I'm going to go to the directory of the Anchor server and I'm going to choose my mount.bat. I'm going to go ahead and push OK. So what I'm basically saying here is when the computer starts, before a user is logged in, I want Windows to run this script and map those drives. And it will map the drives under the system context. Now I'm going to go to server 3 and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to Computer Configuration, Windows Settings, Scripts, Startup. I'm going to add a script and I'm going to choose mount.bat from my C Anchor server directory. I put it in the Anchor server directory just so that it's easy to find. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and restart servers 2 and 3. Okay, now that we're back, servers 2 and 3 have restarted. Let's take a look at our mappings. As you can see, we have two drives that now show up, drive F and drive R. These drives actually point to server 1's F drive and R drive. Now, the Windows shell acts a little funny when you map a drive under the system context. It's just a little quirky in the sense that it adds these red X's. These drives are still fully accessible, however, and have the folders that I previously created. So I'll go to drive 3 or server 3, and I can see here I have drives F and R, and they also point to the right place. You can go ahead and ignore the red X. These drives will mount properly when the system starts up. Now that we have these set up, we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is setting up the Anchor software. So what we want to do is go to the machine that has Apache installed, and we want to run this Anchor Server Management shortcut. As you can see, it will bring up the system setup. I already have a license key prepared, but you're going to want to get your license key by clicking this link if you don't have one yet. I'm going to go ahead and fill out the standard information, and I'm going to leave all of the default settings as they are. Now, I'm going to get to this third step here, which is the system settings step. For the host name, I want to specify the IP address or the host name that will be pointing to the load balancer itself. So in this case, I'm just going to choose loadbalancer.com, which obviously doesn't work. I'll change it to loadbalancer.local. And then I get to choose my file store and my DB store or database store locations. As I mentioned previously, the file stores hold the raw binary data, and the DB stores hold the SQLite databases. I've chosen drive F to hold my files and drive R to hold my SQLite databases or my root databases. So for drive F, I'm going to go ahead and check this file store folder that I previously created, and you do have to choose a folder. You can't choose the root drive letter. So you can either create that on your own, or you can use this new folder button here. And then for the database store, I'm going to go ahead and choose drive letter R and the databases folder that I previously created. And I'm going to go ahead and keep all of the settings the same. You can find out more about the system setup using our system setup instructional video and documentation. And now my server has been configured. But we're not quite done yet. What we want to do before this is pretty much complete is go to server 1. We want to go to the Anchor server installation directory, so C Anchor server in this case, go to the conf folder and open up config.ini. There's just a few parameters that we want to set here. First is the cluster host. The cluster host parameter needs to be the IP address of that specific machine. In this case, the 172.16.1.161 IP address. This will indicate to the other servers what IP address that machine can be reached at. It's the cluster host IP address. The next thing we want to do is make sure that the portal host is set to an explicit IP address. We know that portal, or the database, has been installed on this machine. So we're going to go ahead and set it to 172.16.1.161. The web host should have already been set for you because of what we specified during installation. And it should be set to the IP address of the machine where you installed Apache. In my case, it's server 2, so that is correct. I'm going to go ahead and push save. I'm going to move on to the second machine. I'm going to go to the Anchor server folder, open the config.ini file. I'm going to set the cluster host to the IP address of the machine itself. So in this case, it's going to be the second server's IP address. And then I'm going to go down to the portal database. This should already be set because under installation, I set the IP address for the PostgreSQL/portal database to the first server's IP address. And then under web, I want to make sure to set the web's IP address to an explicit IP address. I know the web is installed on this second server, so I'm just going to put the IP address of the second server here. Push save. And then in the third step, I'm going to go to the third Anchor server, go to the config file, change the cluster host to be the explicit IP address of this machine, and I should have the value set for the portal and the web since these have already been set during installation. Keep in mind that portal and Postgres mean the same thing. This refers to the PostgreSQL server. Great. So I can go ahead and push save. And what I want to do is I want to restart the Anchor server. So I'm going to do that by going to Services, Anchor server here right at the top, and push restart. On the second server, I'm going to restart the server using the command line. Just on this first install, it will require that I kill the task itself. So I'm going to go ahead and do -im, and it's server.exe. So task kill /f/im server.exe. I can do net start Anchor server. Okay, and then I'm going to do task kill /f. So now that all of the server services have been restarted successfully, all that remains is for me to set up actually the mapping for my load balancer or for my DNS server with round robin capabilities. All right, so let's talk about those mappings now. The way the mapping should work for the load balancer or DNS server is that any connections that come to the load balancer that are looking for port 510 should be mapped to the internal Apache server on port 510. Any connections coming on port 80 should be mapped to the internal Apache server on port 80. And any connections coming to port 443 should be spread out across the 3 Anchor servers. So again, 510 to 510 on the Apache server, so server 2 in this case, 80 to 80 on the Apache server, server 2 in this case, and then you want to make sure to map external connections on 443 to all 3 Anchor servers. And the reason that this is because Apache listens on 80 and 510, and the Anchor server service itself listens on 443. And that about wraps it up for the high availability configuration. We recommend that you call us to set up an appointment when you decide to move forward with the high availability configuration so that we can walk you through the entire process. You can reach us at support@anchorworks.com, and you can find out more about the product at anchorworks.com.